Reverend Leslie founded his own church at the age of 65. He regularly preached until he was 95 years old before passing away at age 98. Story was told that he graduated from his small high school as valedictorian, but he had to go to work immediately to meet family needs. He performed janitorial duties in office buildings and public schools for a number of years. I remember him as a man committed to providing for his immediate family as well as for his grandchildren, many of whom at times spent time under his roof with his wife, Barbara. He had a quick smile, which could temporarily hide the fact that he was a man of deep conviction in many ways. He believed in right and wrong, the building of character, and that your word was your bond. These convictions were maintained and applied under the auspices of the fear of the Lord, which he regularly pointed out in light of Job 28:28 was true wisdom. He was always striving to provide for others, and he took an interest in me. I knew the building that he worked in, and during my senior year, more than once, I asked him for lunch money because of financial strains in my early household. He was always giving me 3 times more than what I asked for, and he would never receive repayment. He was motivated to facilitate the dreams of others like me, as well as his family and friends. I wanted to be like this man. I wanted to image him in multiple ways. I wanted to develop his type of character with elements such as integrity, generosity, humility, and the ability to laugh at oneself. I wanted to strive for goals like honest work, enabling generosity and provision for others. I wanted to demonstrate one day before my family that the Lord graciously calls us to areas of service and equips us to perform works of service. These things I saw modeled in Reverend Leslie. In a number of ways, Reverend Leslie helped shape my understanding of God and imaging from my early years. God's view as revealed in the Bible was the most important view on anything and everything. It was he who first taught me that my worth as a human being was based upon God's view of me. God made me his image bearer. Over time, I came to learn that we are most effective in imaging God and facilitating human flourishing when we are striving towards ideals that are informed by biblical and theological guidelines. The world advocates self-maintenance, the accumulation of wealth and power as flourishing. This further suggests that the pervasive power of sin makes perfect attainment of these biblical ideals impossible in this life. Image bearers, nevertheless, work towards such ideals because, according to biblical and theological guidelines, they are worthy of pursuit. Human beings possess capacities to reflect, plan, and move towards developmental goals. But image bearing is more than just capacities, but of strong relational and functional dimensions. Human beings are image bearers, but full imaging can be accomplished only in Jesus Christ. I believe that Lauren Wilkinson is correct when he argues that imaging is humanity's task and privilege, both to model God's care and love to creation and to articulate creation's love and worship to the Creator. My focus here, admittedly, is the call to demonstrate care and love to God's creation. This is not merely to maintain creation as is, but to develop it, which involves a wise exercising of work. When imaging God, we express praise and gratitude through our work of actualizing creation's potential to maintain life and to enhance life. Work provides access to dignity so critical for the health and peace of mind of God's image bearers. Such dignity is a function of personal development, leading to God-imaging contributions in three spheres: community, accountability, and grace. Human beings are image bearers of God in community. The triune God exhibits a community within the unity of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Millard Erickson observes a similarity between the love that humans should have for God and the love that humans should have for one another. God intends that a similar sense of fellowship, obedience, and love be humans' manifestation to God, and that humans be bound together with one another in love. For all human beings, the image of God entails a corporate dimension, facilitating a concern for the health of a community with occasional attention given to individuals. Believers are cautioned to do good to everyone, especially to those who are of the household of faith. The church should demonstrate a concern for the larger structures of society in which it exists. Paul, for example, calls for supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings, and for all who are in high positions. Reverend Leslie viewed his janitorial work as a labor of love. First, as a labor of love, he could provide for some of the needs of his family. A second labor of love emerged as he helped the people working in the offices that he cleaned. They could work more effectively with a more positive perspective when they saw that the garbage cans were emptied, appropriate places were dusted, rugs were vacuumed, and the restrooms were clean. He shared that he would often pray and sing while he was working. The community aspect of the image should summon a view expressed along the lines of, I am being developed. I work towards certain communal ideals. I achieve for the sake of others, for the advancement of others. Worldly forces advance flourishing as merely self-actualization. Image bearers of God should be advocates of flourishing community and just practices for other image bearers. We in the church are challenged to be such advocates. How can we demonstrate divine community in the lives of our family members, our co-workers, classmates, and members of the family of God in our churches? We are image bearers of God in community. Second, we are image bearers of God and accountable. Accordingly, various spheres of stewardship are entrusted to us. Augustine, for example, embraced service to others through the power of God's grace. Even as an influential bishop, he could speak of members of the church as my fellow citizens, still on pilgrimage with. And again, they are your servants and my brethren, but you have willed them to be your children and my masters. And you have ordered me to serve them if I wish to live with you and share your life. His accountability to others was designed and empowered by God. But our world is fallen and imperfect. Human violations of love and community result in traditions and policies to remind a populace of its ideals. Violations of the same may result in enforcement. This is another aspect of communal accountability. Laws are required because even grace-produced imaging can fall into the temptation to control other image bearers in potentially abusive relationships. When Reverend Leslie brought his young family up from Alabama during the 1930s, they could be asked to leave an apartment at the whim of the landlord. There were no policies at the time to prohibit this kind of event. Sometimes laws and policies themselves require scrutiny. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. moved such consideration in an appropriate, evaluative direction when in his monumental letter from a Birmingham jail, He offered the standard. A just law is a man-made code that squares with moral law or the law of God. Worldly forces press us towards autonomy as flourishing. Image bearers of God, however, should be advocates of flourishing accountability and just practices for other image bearers. In what ways can we in the church model accountability? Much begins in the home. Much more can continue in the church. And the Lord may lead some to hold government and policymakers in account. In the end, the lack of perfection in all domains of human existence demands types of accountability. We are image bearers of God and community. Second, we are accountable image bearers. Third, we are image bearers of God in grace. We should, on occasions, extend grace to ourselves and to others, despite our inadequacies and many mistakes. A remembrance of grace can bring healing when experiencing the often expressed inconsistencies in human relationships, individually and institutionally. Sometimes confrontation and correction are needed, depending upon the issue involved and the overarching circumstances. Yet we do not often behave in ways that reflect a responsibility to relationships in community. Here the need is not only information on what is right, but also the recognition that something is needed to empower proper response. J. Petute Burns could speak of an Augustinian emphasis in an understanding of grace as the divine operation in angels and humans through which they are moved to know and love God. The other side of the coin of loving God is loving one's neighbor as oneself. Reverend Leslie would go fishing during the warm weather whenever he could. It was a kind of extension of grace to himself, to allow some space for things like the enjoyment of the surroundings, the opportunity to meditate, or the forming of a different perspective on a troublesome situation. He would embrace the fact that he needed these periods of grace. He would also acknowledge that he needed to extend grace to others. I saw him criticized unjustly for things he tried to accomplish. Despite these setbacks, he would still attempt works on behalf of others and would smile in the midst of it all regardless. With a renewed heart and mind, he would take on whatever the situation was at the time. And he would infuse grace into his interaction because along with his renewed perspective, he would understand that those with whom he interacted, they were also in need of grace. You see, worldly forces pull us toward the subjection of others through things such as guilt and fear. To the contrary, image bearers of God should be advocates of flourishing grace and just practices for other image bearers. How can we demonstrate divine like grace to ourselves and to family members, immediate and in the family of God? Grace should also be extended to those outside of these circles, particularly in these times of racial and ethnic division in our surroundings. We are image bearers of God and community. Second, we are accountable image bearers. Third, we are image bearers of God in grace. A biblical worldview assumes that God is continually at work. Perfection in creation, however, occurs only at the end, when the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. In the meantime, God does remain at work. Reverend Leslie strived his entire life to accomplish much for the sake of others. Like many image bearers, he worked towards certain ideals, though never meeting them perfectly. His character was demonstrated in his continual striving, despite setbacks, disappointments, and occasional failures. His dependence upon God for strength and encouragement enabled him to look beyond himself, to see the needs of others. His continual construction of Bible-based convictions gave him both his sense of accountability to others before God and his extensions of grace to himself and others. He often wondered if his efforts ever really accomplished anything. One may not see the fruit of his or her labor, but it may facilitate the flourishing of others. One thing is sure, without his faithful striving, his eldest grandson would not be standing before you this day. Flourishing for image bearers is the striving for ideals informed by God's revealed word. Striving to achieve God's designs while sometimes falling short is a hallmark of our being image bearers of God. May we all be strengthened to demonstrate God's community, accountability, and grace. May we continually model and seek models of these ideals as I did with my grandfather, Reverend Leslie Fields Sr. Thank you.